All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stigma-Free Society's Facebook Live event. My name is Gerry Friesen, also known as a recovering farmer. I am a stress and conflict specialist working out of Manitoba. Because of my own journey with mental illness, I have a real passion in talking about it because it is in talking to others we can find a path forward for ourselves. You can learn more about me by visiting gerryfriesen.ca. Through this Facebook Live event, I am representing the Stigma-Free Society, which is a Canadian registered charity that aims to reduce stigma of all kinds with a focus on mental health. This event is part of their Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, an online community-based mental health program that creates access to mental health education and peer support training, as well as practical and relatable resources for those living in rural and agricultural communities. You can find the toolkit at ruralmentalwellness.com. I'm excited today to have the opportunity to chat with Lewellyn Melnyk. Lewellyn, hi. I know that we started talking about this probably a year ago, and you were busy writing your book, and so you wanted to wait till that project was done. And so here we are today, and the good news is your project is done, and I know you're going to talk about that, and I'm looking forward to it. So welcome to the show, Lewellyn.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for being patient. I know I put you off a few times, but your patience is very good for me. I needed to get some stuff done before we got on here, so thank you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I was rewarded by waiting because Lewellyn actually sent me a copy of her book before actually it got out on the shelves. And I had the privilege of reading that. And so I look forward to talking about it today. But before we jump into that, just a quick introduction to Lewellyn. Lewellyn is a journalist by trade and a farmer by choice. She worked as a reporter and anchor at CKX TV in Brandon, Manitoba until 2007 before focusing on farming alongside her husband and family. Inspired by her personal challenges with mental health, grief, and a desire to help others, her new book, Rooted, will help others learn to love themselves and improve their mental health. In 2021, Lewellyn facilitated a mental health program called Talk, Ask, Listen in collaboration with the Do More Ag Foundation, a national organization that teaches farmers how to recognize the symptoms of mental illness and get support. Lewellyn has a passion for country music and enjoys running, especially on gravel roads. I found that a little interesting. She lives on a grain farm near Angusville, Manitoba, with her husband and two children. You can follow her on Instagram and Twitter, and it's at Lewellyn Melnyk. So again, Lewellyn, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So can you begin by telling us how you started on your journey into mental health advocacy?
Sure. So, I had struggles with mental health throughout my life, and I always had a feeling that I was broken or something was wrong with me, or um, I felt shame or guilt knowing that I struggled so much. And I had a feeling that I was alone in that and that nobody else felt that way. And I had something wrong with me. And so I learned that, gosh, I'm just human. And oh, we all deal with these things incredibly. I wasn't alone. Um, and so that realization, it was an important one because I think that a lot of mental health struggles are because people feel that way and because they feel alone and they think something's wrong with them. And really, we all can share our stories. And so I wanted to become an advocate just because I always found helpful to know that I wasn't alone and that I am just human and that there are so many people who struggle with their mental health. And so I had a calling on my heart to speak up and use my words, and let people know that this is my story. And look, I had these struggles, and if you do too, it's okay. And that's normal. And there's nothing wrong with you, and you're not broken. And so I wanted to just send that message out into the world and let people know that.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And as you well know, Lewellyn, I'm on a journey myself. And as we talked about briefly before we started, it's when we talk to each other, we in fact learn from each other. And like you say, number one is you find out you're not alone. Number two is when we talk to each other, we learn how to better manage our own journeys as well, because everyone has their own little tools they use to in fact become mentally well.
Absolutely. And I always found it really helpful when somebody shared their story with me. That is really what helped me the most, that connection with other people. And I didn't find that for a lot of years, but now it's funny when you reach out and share your story, it comes back tenfold. And so in my to try and help other people, I'm getting that back, right?
Yeah.
So it is really important to share our stories, and that is kind of my message. Let's share our stories because it's only to help us all.
And speaking of your story, Llewellyn, can you say a little bit more about what your journey has been like?
Sure. So I struggled with depression when I was a child. I grew up on a grain farm just north of Russell, and was diagnosed with depression at the age of 12. Um, I write in my book about how at that age I had to have a difficult conversation with my mom about how I was feeling, and I didn't know why, and I didn't know what to do. And at 12, I needed some guidance, and it was a difficult time. There wasn't a lot of help for a 12-year-old with depression in rural Manitoba. And so my mom was a great advocate for me and tried to get me help and did do that. But it has been a lifelong journey. And so I did struggle with anxiety as an adult as well. And thought, oh, okay, so my mental health struggles are over, but then bam, got hit again in my 30s, and it was another difficult time. So it's been ebb and flow kind of throughout my life. And I put myself on a journey to figure out what I needed, because I knew that I needed to find the things that would help me and reach out for help. And I did that. And so I wrote this book basically giving people healthy habits, giving them tips from experts, and also telling them my story along the way and kind of intertwining both.
Yeah, and I like what you say, and I sometimes refer to we have a journey of recovery, but then there's also a journey of discovery, which is, I think, in at least in my case, it's so much more important than necessarily the recovery piece, because I sometimes associate recovery with the doctor prescribing antidepressants, right? But discovery came when I got
Mhm.
involved with the rural farm and stress line, and I got that training, and I started discovering and really figuring out what was going on, and so that's really helpful in doing that. And I know certainly reading your book, you have a lot of that in there, that the discovery piece, and I think that's really important for people to see.
Yeah. And sometimes when you're in a bad place, you honestly just don't know where to start. Like you have no idea. Like, oh, I feel awful and I stay in bed, you know? And yeah, sometimes you need to sit for sure. Um, but I wanted people to kind of have my book as a handbook or a guide. Like, okay, you feel crap today. Let's lay out what you need to do. Okay. Are you drinking water? Are you eating nutritious meals? Are you getting outside? Are you getting some exercise? Are you doing all the things that are going to help you feel better tomorrow or the next day? And so, yeah, it's kind of like that framework that is really important. But you're right, that discovery piece is huge as well. And that's an individual journey. So for me, it was, establishing my life here on the farm. And for other people, that might look different, but it's individualized to your own life. And so that's the message I wanted to send people was take the time for that self-discovery. And sometimes that really pays off.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's the whole thing about talking about it, but you took that a step further and you wrote about it. What inspired you to actually start putting words to paper for other people to read?
We have a program in Russell called Mothers Helping Mothers. And so it was a friend of mine, Tennille, who is part of my book. She created a program for mothers who are suffering from postpartum depression or just needed any kind of community connection. And so I went to her program, and one night we were making vision boards. And one of the things I wrote on my vision board was I wanted to write a book one day. And everyone who was there in class kind of went, "Really? You want to write a book?" And I was like, "Yeah. Well, why don't you do it?" "Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm trained in this. I don't I do it?" And I went to a personal development a conference in March of 2020, and one of the things we did at the end of the conference was pick a goal, and my goal was write a book. So after that, it was kind of two things that came together, and I had just lost a friend to mental illness, and so I decided I was going to write it for her, number one, number two for me, and also for anybody else who needed help, and I knew that I could help people.
Oh, that's such a good story. So, excuse me, okay, you have a copy of the book there. I wish you'd hold it up so people can see it.
Sure. So it's called Rooted: How I Stay Small Town Strong When Life Gets Hard, and How You Can Too. A guide to finding joy, learning from struggle, and coming together one season at a time. And you can find information on my website at lewellynmelnyk.com. And yeah, you can order it there and learn more about it.
Okay, perfect. And that's lewellynmelnyk.com.
Yep, you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram, and there's links there.
And I imagine people can find it on Amazon as well.
It is. Yeah, it is up on Amazon. You kind of have to search the whole title because you get kind of caught up in a lot of other books with similar titles. But yeah, it's there.
And so, Lewellyn, going to your book, and like I said, I've had the privilege of reading it. There's a lot of information in there for people. It's clear you've done a lot of research into mental health issues, into mental illness. But part of that is also weaving your own story in there. Why is that important?
I think that that's how we translate things in our brain, and we do some of our best learning through experience. And so I wanted readers to feel like they were walking through my experience and how I was discovering these helpful things for me, so they could feel that about how helpful it was. Because we can sit all day long and talk about exercise and nutrition, and hear it all the time, and it kind of gets lost. But if you know the reasons why, it may stick with you. And so I wanted to tell my story in those things because they are important, but maybe it'll stick with you. And so even just one thing I talked about when I was really starting to exercise and getting running, I always felt I had no time, but I had to do it. So I would work out in my pajamas. And not a word of a lie, I would get my kid ready for the day and go work out in my pajamas because I knew that I just needed to go at that time of the day. And if I didn't go, I wouldn't get it done. And so I wanted people to know that's okay. Like, you don't have to go to a gym and you don't have to look a certain way or be a certain way. Just do the thing. And if it's in your pajamas for 10 or 15 minutes, great, go do it. Like, that's what I wanted people to take away from
it. Excuse me. And also telling your story takes a certain amount of vulnerability, and so can you talk a little bit about that vulnerability you felt when you were exposing yourself? And maybe it was when you were talking about it before writing the book, but even as you were writing the book.
Yeah. I think part of what we struggle with in rural communities is we were never taught to share certain things, in particular our struggles, or if we're going through a hard time, or and so I think to counter that, the only way to do that is to be authentic and be vulnerable and lay it out. That's the only way. And I mean, culturally, we were taught not to talk about certain things, but we're learning now that didn't really serve us, did it? So let's go the other way. With this book, maybe I go really far the other way because I'm very vulnerable and probably share way more than most people would. But there is an intention there to spur other people to do the same. And maybe you can't be as vulnerable as I have with this book, and that's okay. But I want people to know that that key vulnerability, that being authentic, is super important. And if you find it hard, keep practicing it. It's not going to be easy, but it is going to be worth it.
Yeah, and what I found, Lewellyn, is when you start showing that vulnerability again, and perhaps this is repeating something, but it's worth repeating, I think, is the fact that it's when you start showing that vulnerability, then other people do as well. And so there again is it helps other people when they see that, number one, the message that they are not alone, and number two is that it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay not to be okay. And so that's kind of a step in the right direction to start improving their mental health.
For sure. It's what you do with Stigma-Free Society. You doing these interviews is great because people can hear what other stories are, and yeah, it's sometimes difficult to have those conversations and to share those things, but gosh, there's so much healing in it for all of us.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about that a little bit. And I know you grew up in rural Manitoba and you now farm in rural Manitoba, obviously. Why does it remain so taboo to talk about these things? And I know part of that, and again, when I read your book and you talk about small town Manitoba and you talk about the coffee shop talk and you talk about the facade people put on, why is it still so taboo to talk about it?
I think that it's just been culturally accepted that we are tough. Farmers are known to be resilient, and not only farmers, but people in small towns. We're tough, we're resilient, and we can get through whatever. And a lot of times too, and I hear it often, people will complain and then they're made fun of, or somebody will sarcasm, make a joke, or they'll say, "You're fine. It's fine. It'll be fine." Well, it might be fine, but maybe a validation of that concern and fear and whatever it is that you're complaining about is legit. And we need to be able to share those feelings without judgment, really, from ourselves, but also from others. And have some real conversations. And another thing is, we don't have to do it after drinking 10 beer. We don't have to get drunk for us to talk about our feelings either. There's a good culture of drinking in a lot of small towns, and I want people to know that you could talk about that stuff at any time. You don't have to have a few drinks first. And so I think it's just going to take some time to make a change in that culture. And I do see it. I do see it happening. But it's going to be a slow change over time. And so that's why we need to practice it, I think.
Yeah, and what I've noticed is in my kids who are in their 30s now. Yesterday, I talked to a university class who obviously they're probably in their early 20s. I see a distinct difference between those younger generation and their approach to mental health, and I'm hoping that can expand, that they can teach their parents and their grandparents that, you know what, it's okay to talk.
Yeah, and it's going to be, I think, the hardest for those older generations. Absolutely. Because I think you're right. I think we're seeing a shift with the younger generations. And wow, that's great. Fabulous, right? Like, I think it's wonderful. I even see a shift in my own kids when I was younger, an immense change. Um, and so, yeah, writing my book is probably for, the 30s, the 40s, 50s, 60-year-olds that are going to have a difficult time because they are the ones who are going to feel the guilt and the shame because they dealt with something that they thought was, not good. I shouldn't be feeling this. Why am I feeling this?
Yeah.
And I get shame about it. And so, yeah, it might take a little longer for the older generation, but, and maybe the younger generation can teach us something.
Absolutely. The other piece about what you do when you tell your story and you write your book is you like to use humor as well. Can you say a little bit more about using humor and joy when writing a book?
Yeah. I use a lot of music in my book as well as humor and joy because that's kind of how I've always processed things with music. I'm a very musical person. But humor and joy is, it's funny because that's kind of how life is. It can be devastating one minute and you can be joyful the very next. And sometimes that's hard to manage. And I can kind of compare it to you're at a funeral and you're grieving and you're sitting in the back of the church and somebody makes a joke and you want to laugh because it's really funny. You really want to laugh, but you're at a funeral. You probably shouldn't laugh, right? But we can have all those things and they can be simultaneous. They can work together. It's not one or nothing. And maybe you shouldn't laugh in the back of a church at a funeral, but you are allowed to have those feelings. And so I really wanted to write in a way that made people laugh about a really tough situation because, wow, if we can't laugh and find joy in some of the crappiest part of our lives and in those tough times, um, we're gonna have a hard time. So I write about finding joy in everything we do because finding joy is the greatest thing. And sometimes that joy comes when you least expect it and in very unexpected places, but we have to look for it no matter what is going on. So I wanted to write in that way so that people got a feel for that. You can feel both ways.
Yeah, and it's important that we laugh. And something that I sometimes talk about is the numbers show that kids can laugh up to 400 times a day, and as adults, that comes down as low as maybe 10. And so as adults, we need to learn to laugh more. And I certainly know in my own journey, there's certain people that when I get together with them, we spend a lot of time laughing, and how much easier that makes me, how much better that makes me feel, how it seems to take my burden away or take the cloud away for at least a while. And so that certainly is an important piece for me.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Sometimes we don't have the capacity to laugh. And if you're in a deep and dark place, you don't have that capacity. You just don't. And that's okay too. But when you do and you find it, gosh, isn't it great? And you're right, it feels rough, right? When you can laugh with friends and enjoy a time. I spent the weekend curling in a small town rink and so much fun. I love curling, but you know what I love more than curling is spending time with all my friends.
Yeah.
And hanging out and having good times and making jokes and laughing. And you're right. I think that we need to practice those things and do those things often.
I saw a picture of you on social media posing at the curling rink, and I think you made reference to an ugly sweater.
Yeah, so my whole team decided to do ugly sweaters for curling, and so we had one of our teammates made a trip to Valley Village, and we wore our ugly sweaters. And the only time we won during the bonspiel was when we wore ugly sweaters, so we had to keep wearing them. So we laughed about it, but it was again in fun, and it was great.
Yeah,
Brought joy to me.
exactly. And it's interesting how when you start socializing, and again, there's a really important piece for mental wellness is is that human connection. And, you know, if COVID taught us anything, it is how important human connection is. And so I find myself, I've been doing most of my work for the last, it's 3 years now, sitting in my office here, right? And doing most of my work virtually, so that human connection is lacking in my life. But when I do get together with friends again, it's something that I instantly feel my mental health improving, because that human connection is so important.
It is. It's so important. And you're right. We just haven't had enough of it. And it's, you have to look for it, I feel like, in this era, because you can go to a self checkout and not see a human. You can do a lot of things online and not see a human. Um, and so we have to really cultivate those connections. And sometimes it takes us looking for them to find them. Um, but you're right, it does. It pays off when you do.
You know, it's interesting you say that about self checkouts. A few years ago, someone was talking to me about human connection, and they said, well, you even need to chat with the person that's bagging your groceries. And I kind of took note of that. And then I remember the next couple of times I would fill up my car with gas, or I would pull into a gas station, I would actually chat with the gas jockey for a little bit. And even something as small as that is so important.
It is. It's important to you, but guess what? It's also important to them. And
Exactly.
so a lot of this mental health, we have a responsibility, not just to ourselves, but to everybody else around us, right? And so we're all human and we all deal with things. And that little chat that you had with somebody who was pumping your gas, you may have made their day. That may have been what they needed that day. And you don't even know it.
Exactly.
So it's great to do those things.
Yeah. So tell me, and then basically you have, but sum it up. What do you want the readers of your book to take away from your book?
Well, a lot of things, but number one, healthy habits for themselves to figure out what they need to stay healthy. Absolutely. I want to help people do that. Number two, an appreciation for farmers. We are less than 2% of the population, and our stories don't get told enough. And I really wanted to advocate for the agricultural community, because there is lots of misinformation that comes from non-farmers. And I think our stories need to be told from farmers. So I'm happy to do that. And also, I wanted to advocate for women as well. And so I think I did those three things, or I hope I did in my story. Um, I think most of all, I want people to walk away knowing that they're human and they're wonderful and they're not broken and there's nothing wrong with them if they struggle with their mental health. That's the most important message.
Yeah, that's perfect. So after having gone through this project, are you going to write another book?
So many people have asked me that. And honestly, right now, if you ask me if I'm going to write another book, I'm going to say for sure no. Not that it wasn't a rewarding process. I loved it and it was healing for me. It was a ton of work. My children are small. It stole time away from them and the farm. And I need to refocus a little bit and put my time back where it belongs. Will I write again? Absolutely. I will write again. Maybe it'll be down the road. Will it be a book? I don't know. I say all the time, maybe it'll be writing songs. I feel like that's kind of where my heart is. And that's a little bit lighter. And that's kind of what I need. So we'll see. We'll see. I'll never say never because I'm a journalist and I write every day. I write all the time.
Yeah,
So write a jig. So we'll see how things go. But yeah, for now, this book's gonna just be out into the world and see how it does.
perfect. Lewellyn, hold up your book one more time and tell people where they can find it.
Okay, so there's my book. You can see it.
Yep.
It's called Rooted: How I Stay Small Town Strong When Life Gets Hard and How You Can Too. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on my website, lewellynmelnyk.com. And you can ask for it in library bookstores. It's available pretty much anywhere you can buy books. So yeah, it is open to the world. Hopefully you can find it.
All right.
And if you do read it, make sure you tag me so I can see it on social media.
Sounds good, Lewellyn. And again, thank you so much for joining us today. And again, to our audience, I've had the privilege of reading her book, and I think it's an excellent resource for all the reasons she just mentioned. I'm not going to try and recall everything she mentioned, but certainly it's an important resource for that, but it also tells a really good story of her own personal journey. So thank you, Lewellyn, for joining us today. Your insights into mental health and wellness certainly have resonated with me, as I'm sure they have with our audience. So I just want everybody to know today that it's okay to have challenges, it's okay to be different, and it's okay to need help. And certainly it's okay to reach out for help. If you're struggling today, make sure you reach out and talk about it. Also, please avail yourself of the many resources available in the Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, which can be found at ruralmentalwellness.com. So till next time, stay safe and be well. Thanks again, Lewellyn.
Thanks, Gerry.